I welcome you all to the Philosopher's Gallery in DVK Central Library. Today I am here to present before you about one of the famous philosopher named William James. Now let us go to the short life history of William James. As the introduction, I would like to say William James is considered by many to be the most insightful and stimulating of American philosophers, as well as the second of the three great pragmatists, the middle link between Charles Sanders Peirce and John Dewey. As a professor of psychology and of philosophy at Harvard University, he became the most famous living American psychologist and later the most famous living American philosopher of his time. Avoiding the logically tied systems typical of European rationalists, such as the German idealist, he cobbled together a psychology rich in philosophical implications and a philosophy enriched by his psychological expertise. More specifically, his theory of the self and his view of human belief as oriented towards conscious action raised issues that required him to turn to philosophy. There he developed his pragmatic epistemology, which considers the meaning of ideas and the truth of beliefs not abstractly, but in terms of the practical difference they can make in people's lives. He explored the implications of this theory in areas of religious belief, metaphysics, human freedom and moral values, and social philosophy. Thus, he created one of the last great philosophical systems in Western thought, even if he did not live quite long enough to complete every aspect of it. The combination of his provocative ideas and his engaging writing style has contributed to the enduring impact of his work. Now, let us go to his family background. In the year 1878, he married Alice Hovey Gibbons, and they had 5 children named Henry, William, Herman, Margaret Mary, and Alexander. James' educational background. Around 1858, he studied painting with William Morris Hunt while the family was living in Newport, Rhode Island. In 1861, enrolled at the Lawrence Scientific School at Harvard University, where he developed into such topics as chemistry and physiology. In 1864, he studied at Harvard Medical School, and later he took a break from his education to join Louis Agassiz's expedition to the Amazon basin. In 1866, James returned to Harvard and resumed his medical classes. He was often haunted by an assortment of ailments, accompanied by depression and suicidal thoughts. After a depressive collapse, James left for 2 years and spent time in France and Germany studying with Helmholtz and learning of the new psychology. In 1869, he received his doctorate. After earning his medical degree, he decided not to practice medicine. He eventually became a lecturer at Harvard University. Initially a lecturer in physiology, he went to teach psychology and philosophy. Now let us go to some of his achievements. In 1872, James was asked to teach physiology at Harvard. He taught anatomy and physiology and spent the rest of 1873 and 1874 recuperating in Europe, primarily Italy. Slowly, he began infiltrating physiological psychology into his courses at Harvard. In 1875, he began teaching psychology, beginning with the relations between physiology and psychology. It has been said that James joked that the first psychology lecture he ever heard was his own. In 1879, James began to teach philosophy at Harvard, becoming assistant professor of philosophy next year. He published The Sentiment Rationality, his first important article in his new discipline. As he got deep into philosophy, he developed a negative attitude towards psychology. After becoming a full professor of philosophy in 1885 and of psychology in 1889, he published his Principles of Psychology in 1890. It had taken him close to 12 years to finish it, and though it would be extremely successful, he was dissatisfied with it and disgusted with psychology. In 1886, James finished and published his most renowned and influential book, The Principles of Psychology, combining his ideas on psychology and philosophy. The book was written with much clarity and charm and vehemently disputed Wundt's view of psychology more specifically. In 1897, James' first philosophical book, The Will to Believe, and other essay in popular philosophy was published, dedicated to Charles Sanders Peirce. In 1898, he lectured on pragmatism in philosophical conceptions and practical results. He stated that humans were practical beings and their mind is to be used to adapt to the ways of the world. James also promoted educational psychology. His lectures to Cambridge Professory were compiled and published in 1899. Talks to teachers on psychology and to students on some of life's ideals. These lectures were used to train teachers and professors throughout the nation for 30 years after his publication. During the end of the turn of the century, James was a member of the American Philosophical Association and the American Psychological Association. He continued to lecture and publish works based now primarily on philosophy and religious ideas. His religious publications included 10 essays comprised in The Will to Believe, discussing his philosophies and the emotional risk of religion. After receiving an honorary doctorate from Harvard in 1903, James and his brother embarked on a trip to the Mediterranean and attended the 5th International Congress of Psychology in Rome. Like the United States, all of Italy admired James. The theories of William James. Pragmatism. James wrote considerably on the concept of pragmatism. According to pragmatism, the truth of an idea can never be proven. James proposed we instead focus on what he called the cash value or usefulness of an idea. Functionalism. James opposed the structuralist focus on introspection and breaking down mental events to the smallest elements. Instead, James focused on the wholeness of an event, taking into the impact of the environment on behavior. James' Lange theory of emotion. Lange theory of emotion proposes that an event triggers a psychological reaction which we then interpret. According to his theory, emotions are caused by our interpretations of these psychological reactions. Both James, the Danish psychologist Carl Lange, independently proposed the theory. Now, I would like to mention some of the works written by William James. The first one is The Principles of Psychology, Classics in the History of Psychology, an internet resource developed by Christopher D. Green of York University, Toronto, Ontario. The second one is The Will to Believe. Another one is Pragmatism, a new name for some old ways of thinking. New York, Longman, Green and Co. James became more interested in philosophical issues as his career progressed. In 1902, he published The Varieties of Religious Experience, which is considered to be another one of his leading works. Pragmatism further explored his philosophical beliefs. A Pluralist Universe proved to be his last major work to be published during his lifetime. In 1903, he received an honorary doctorate from Harvard University. As the conclusion, I would like to say, as a professor of psychology and of philosophy at Harvard University, he became the most famous living American psychologist and later the most famous living American philosopher of his time. I hope you have got some idea about one of the famous philosopher, William James. Thank you.